So tonight we have a little bit of a change of environment, and I'm super excited for what we're going to be talking about. Last time we talked about the different signs that Jesus gave that we could look out for before his second coming. And we had that question of, okay, if we know the next thing to happen is this setting up of God's kingdom according to that statue image and dream in Daniel chapter 2, then how soon can we expect that to occur? And are there signs or indicators that we can look for? And I think we recognize that a lot of things that Jesus explained, we do see in our time happening of both a increase of frequency and intensity. So we see them more often, we see them happening even stronger. So let's get right into it. Now, some of those things that Jesus talked about were not very amazing things that we know are evident in our world today. And it begs the question, why would God in the first place allow such things to happen, like death, suffering, when you have wars and famines and disease and people that go through so many things, people that experience cancer, malnutrition, different diseases, car accidents where multiple people die, different just bad things. These catastrophic natural disasters where many people lose their lives, and just different forms of suffering in general. And those are difficult things that every human has to either witness or in some form go through. And it begs the question, if God is so good, if God is this loving creator, this loving being, why do we have suffering in our world? It's a very good question. And that's what we're going to look at today, and how the Bible answers that question. And I want to say begins to answer that question. We're not going to be able to give the 100%. We have to admit that we're not going to be able to give the 100% answer to every single question about why different situations of suffering occur. But we can begin to see an answer according to what God also reveals to us. Just like God revealed to us things that have happened in the past before they happened, so that we can trust him about what he says in the future, God also has revealed to us insights about what's happening behind the scenes and how all of this started, and how this whole suffering and death and disease thing got here in the first place. So let's start with the very beginning. Go right to the beginning, which is the book of Genesis in the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. This is right in the beginning in Genesis chapter 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." So this is the very beginning of creation, and how God creates everything. He creates the world, and here we see him creating light, bringing light. And notice in verse 4 what he says about it. He says that it was good. And as you continue reading this creation account, Genesis 1, you keep seeing this word good occur. And in verse 31, the last verse in Genesis 1 says, "Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good." Imagine what that means when God sees something and sees that it's very good. It's not just good in the way that we might say something is good as if it's okay, but it's absolutely perfect. And this was God in his creation. This is before any disease, death, bad things, lying, murder, any bad things. There's only good things that exist, and when God is creating these good things and he says it's very good, we can just imagine how that was. Now, is our world good and very good and only good today? How did it come to be like it is, the way that it is now, if everything that God originally created was so good? Let's look at the Gospel of Matthew. So we're going to go in the New Testament in the Bible to Matthew and verse 13. Matthew 13. And here in Matthew 13, Jesus gives a really interesting parable that we're going to read. So Matthew 13 and verse 24 says, "In another parable he put forth to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn." So later, the disciples are talking to Jesus, and they want to know more about what exactly Jesus was talking about. And if we go to verse 37, it says, He answered and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. So this parable, you have what? You have this man who Jesus says sowed what kind of seed? Good seed in his field. Remember, everything that God created, it was good. But when the grain has sprouted and produced a crop, then tares also appeared. So there were he planted good seeds, and then apparently in this field, tares also began to appear. And notice the question that his servants asked the man. Did you not sow, in verse 27, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? Wait, didn't you only put out good seeds into this field? Why does it have these bad plants that grew up also in the field? In verse 28, the man, he answers the servants and says, An enemy has done this. So he says, I am not actually the one responsible for the bad tares that you see in this field. There is an enemy, another actor that has done this. Very interesting. Who could this enemy be? In the Bible, and you might have heard of this character before, Satan or the devil is described multiple times. The word Satan literally meaning adversary, or another word for enemy. And let's take a look at this character, this Satan or devil that the Bible talks about. So let's look at Luke chapter 13, verses 10 through 16. So Matthew, Mark, Luke chapter 13. And we're going to read here something also very interesting in the story that we see during Jesus' ministry. So Luke chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. It says, "The Lord then answered him and said, 'Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath?'" So there was this woman who was bowed down, and Jesus, he comes and he heals her. And this happened to be on the Sabbath. And Jesus heals this woman, and so these religious leaders, they become upset, and because they think that Jesus wasn't supposed to do something like this on the Sabbath, and they're just basically trying to accuse him. But and Jesus gives this response to them, and notice within his response that he says who had bound this woman, who was responsible for this this malady that she had. In verse 16, he says, whom Satan has bound, or this adversary or enemy. So who is this Satan? Let's look at Isaiah verses 14. So there's a couple places in the Bible where it talks about this origination of this Satan or devil character. Let's look first at Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah 14, and I'm going to read verse 12 through 14. "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations?" So it says this we mentioned it, this name Lucifer, which is another name for Satan in the Bible. There's a footnote in my Bible literally meaning day star or morning star. "How are you cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." So where did he fall from? According to verse 12 here, how are you fallen from heaven? So it's this being which apparently was in heaven originally and had fallen from heaven. And why had this being fallen from heaven? It says that he said in his heart, and if you notice 5 times that I will do something to take God's place. He wanted God's position in heaven. He had something inside of him which we call pride or self-exaltation that led him to this fall that's being described. Very interesting. Let's look at Ezekiel 28. So this is another place in the Bible where it talks about this devil or Satan character. Ezekiel chapter 28. Ezekiel 28. And in Ezekiel 28, it begins with this sort of message to a king. But we see very quickly that it's addressing not just a king on this earth. Ezekiel 28, starting in verse 11. "Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation for the king of Tyre, and say to him, Thus says the Lord God, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." We know that any earthly king was not the seal of perfection. So God is talking about someone else here. "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. the Garden of Eden. That was where Adam and Eve had originally been. Every precious stone was your covering: the sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. Whoa. Wow. Look at who this being who God is describing was like. Perfect, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. This, apparently there is this musical part of him even that was built into him. We see in verse 13. And look at this in verse 14. You were the anointed cherub who covers. What's a cherub? That's basically another word for an angel, or a angel of a certain rank in heaven. And it says you are the anointed cherub who covers. What does that mean? That's actually a very significant piece of information. In the Hebrew sanctuary system, which was a tent that they carried around in the Old Testament, and that they also recognized and had as their temple in Jerusalem later on. And it was a place where God himself would physically come. God's presence would actually be there in this temple. And inside of that temple, you had what was called, you had two compartments of this temple. One that was called the holy place, and another that was called the most holy place. And the most holy place, which was like the most sacred or most set apart section of this sanctuary, it had inside of it what was called the Ark of the Covenant. And this Ark of the Covenant was basically a golden box, a very intricate and artistically designed golden box. And inside of it, it had the Ten Commandments, and on the top of it, it had this ornament called the mercy seat. And this ornament, also made of pure gold, it was like two pieces of gold angels that were on top of this box. And God's presence, when he entered that sanctuary, it would be right there. And this was a representation of God's throne in heaven and the angels, two angels that are right before God's presence, who are covering, so to speak, his glory. So when it says here in Ezekiel, you are the anointed cherub who covers, it's indicating that this being was an angel who stood right in the very presence of God. That's how close to God that this angel was, and how high of a position in heaven that this angel had. Let's look at verse 16 and 17. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that they might gaze at you. So this perfect being who is in the very presence of God, it says had sinned in verse 16. And why? What happened? Verse 17 says because his heart was lifted up. Just like what we just read in Isaiah 14, where he said, I will be like the Most High. He had this pride, this desire to exalt himself even above God and take God's place. And this, it says, corrupted his wisdom. And this was the birth of this character that we call the devil or Satan, who we see tempted Adam and Eve. We read that in Genesis 3. And who God says is responsible for all the evil, all the suffering, all the bad things that we see in this world. It's from this devil or Satan, who was actually, whether you can believe it or not, this high angel in heaven. How much in our lives do we see our own pride or selfishness cause grief or cause suffering, either to ourselves or others in our life? We can take a moment to really reflect on that. Let's go back to Matthew 13, and we'll end it there, our conversation today. We see that God is not responsible for all the pain, the suffering, the evil in this world. It comes from Satan, who was originally Lucifer. But why didn't God then just immediately eradicate Satan as soon as he had caused this sin? That's a very valid question that many people have asked. Or even more than that, why would God have created a being who would do something like this? Why would God do that? There's two very key principles, very key, hugely important, and hugely significant principles for us to understand that begin to help us to answer those questions. In the Bible, it says that God is love. We see that in 1 John 4:16. It says that God is love. Love is a very special reality. And in order for love to exist, there has to be a free choice involved. There has to be free will. What do I mean by that? If someone walks into a room and they have a gun, a ill-intentioned person has a gun, and they tell you, do 10 jumping jacks. You would try your best to do those 10 jumping jacks. Or they say to you, hop on one foot. You would try to hop on one foot. Now imagine that they point the same gun at you and they say, okay, now love me. Could you do it? Could someone be forced to now love that person? Can anyone be forced to love? As soon as you take away the choice to either love or not love, it's no longer love. In order for there to be love, there has to be a choice. There has to be the free will of the person in order to choose or not to choose to love. God, when he created his angels, when he created us, he created them with free will because he wanted for there to be true love to exist between him and his creation. If we did not have the choice either to choose him or not, it wouldn't be real love. God would not be receiving actual love from his creation, from his created beings. Lucifer was also created with free will. And unfortunately, we see that he made the decision to not choose God, to not love, to go against him and his government. So God had to allow that he could make that decision. I want to read, we're here in Matthew 13, and let's read verses 28 through 30 one more time. He said to them, an enemy has done this. The servants said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? So his servants say, okay, well, now that we've noticed there are these bad tares in your field? Do you want us to go and gather them up? And notice his answer in verse 29. But he said to them, no. Interesting. Lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So he says, no, don't pull them up right now, the bad tares, but wait. Let them both continue to grow. So apparently the man of the field saw that there was a necessary process of time to take place where both the good plants and the tares would continue to grow, would continue to mature. And when they reached a certain level of maturity of their growth, then the separation could occur and the bad ones could be pulled up. So why didn't God immediately destroy the devil? Well, imagine that there's a president or a major world leader. There's a major world leader and everything seems to be going good, and we'll just for the sake of illustration, we'll say everything is, so to speak, normal, but one of the world leader's cabinet members speaks up and says, hey, the president has been doing these things and nobody has been knowing about it, and it's causing pain to these people in our country. So this accusation goes out against the world leader. Imagine if the very next day on the news, you hear that this cabinet member who had spoken up about this is no longer around. In fact, their body was found laying somewhere. He was dead. Would that either strengthen or weaken the accusations of the cabinet member? What would you think as a citizen? Maybe they were right. Or what was the world leader trying to hide? God was unable to simply wipe out Satan immediately. Time had to be given. The principles of evil, of sin, of what actually is bad needed to be developed. If you think about it, before sin, before evil, there was never a lie, there was never a murder, there was never any bad word or bad act done. Just really think about what that was like. And then you had this sin or opposition to God, opposition to his principles of love that all of a sudden were present. And God needed to allow a certain amount of time before he could just end and put away all the evil, all the bad. Let's look at Revelation chapter 21. Revelation chapter 21. This is going to be the very last text that we'll read. Revelation chapter 21. And I'm going to read verses 3 and 4. It says, and I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. This is a beautiful description of heaven, when everything will be restored back to how it was before. There'll be no more death, no more suffering, no more of the evil that we see here on this earth. we see the suffering and hurt and pain and evil today. But we know that it didn't begin like this. And we know that it will not end like this either. That perfect state of being, that perfect earth, that perfect world that God created is what we will see. We're not there right now, but we're on our way there. Let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, thank you for, again, choosing to reveal to us an insight, even if it's just scratching the surface of why there is suffering in this world, why a good God could allow such suffering to exist. And we see that you are not the one responsible for it. And we see also you've given us this free choice, this free will, Lord. And help us today to make that choice by your grace to serve you, to love you, to continue to learn more about you and who you are and what you've done for us. And thank you for what you've shown us through your word today. And keep us until the next time that we continue to learn more from you and from your word. I pray this and thank you in your name. Bless all of us, Lord.